And if you would like to go ahead, I will give an opening statement here very quickly. The work agents and officers of U.S. Customs and Border Protection do every day has immense importance to both our national and economic security. Put simply, their collective job is to keep bad things and bad people from entering the country illegally. However, our agents and officers' jobs are made harder by the President's fundamentally unserious budget request for CBP. Unfortunately, the fiscal year 24 request is full of inexplicable gimmicks, and I'll explain those later. But for example, the President proposes $174 million for additional surveillance towers, but fails to adequately provide adequate funding to maintain the ones we already have in the field. The budget request calls for an additional 350 Border Patrol agents, and at the same time cuts funding for Border Patrol pay by $63 million. We talked about this yesterday. There's not a single dollar in the CBP request to counter the small drones that the cartels are flying across the border to conduct surveillance on our agents and deliver drug loads. In fact, the holes that Congress would have to fill just to maintain the level of capability we have today totals nearly $400 million due to these gimmicks. If we funded CBP at the requested level, the border would be less secure. And I know you don't want that, and neither do we. The fiscal year 24 request for CBP is disappointing because the men and women in the field need more funding to do the very difficult job that we've given them. They need more agents, more officers, and processing coordinators. We have fewer than 19,000 agents in the field, the lowest level in years, and we continue to lose seasoned agents at an unsustainable rate. They need more advanced technology to detect illicit activity and prevent fentanyl from devastating the lives of our fellow Americans throughout the country, and they need more physical infrastructure. But instead, this budget asks that we spend existing barrier money on environmental remediation instead of new fencing barrier. The President's budget request is a mere $4.2 million above last year's level, despite the record number of crossings we've had over the last 2 years. If you factor in the high inflation we've seen over the last few months, the administration is essentially cutting the CBP budget at a time of border crisis. Budgets communicate priorities, and it's clear by this request that the President's priority is not securing our border, not providing the men and women in the field the means to hold the line. With Title 42 about to end, the situation on the border could easily go from bad to much, much worse. Make no mistake, our adversaries, the transnational criminal organizations who control every inch of the Mexican side of the border, are going to do everything in their power to continue to traffic narcotics and people, fueling violence and human suffering. I look forward to working with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to properly fund CBP and our border security efforts. I'll now turn to my colleague, Mr. Cuellar, for any opening remarks he may have.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And again, it's a pleasure seeing you again, Acting Commissioner Mr. Miller. Again, you are the head of one of the most dynamic agencies in the federal government, and each day you and your workforce are called upon to address new and increasingly complex issues. I think all the folks need to look at is a day in the CBP life, and it's incredible the number of trucks and cars and passengers and arrests that y'all make, and it's so many laws that you have to enforce, so I appreciate that. I also appreciate that you started your career back in 1993 with the U.S. Customs Service as a customs inspector, to now heading the agency, and you bring years of experience, trust, and integrity to this role. And I would say, despite all the pressures that you face every day. You have demonstrated exceptional professionalism and leadership, and we appreciate the work that you do. And again, I say that you're a career official, not in a political capacity, and I think for some jobs, with all due respect to Democrats and Republicans, we should have more career folks like yourself. So we appreciate what you do, and as you know, Homeland is certainly a priority to me as the rest of the members. As I always say, I don't just visit the border, I live there, my family's there, I breathe the air, I drink the water, and it is a place I call home. And I appreciate the work that y'all do, because in fact, my hometown, Laredo, if you look at the crime statistics, they're about 3-4 times safer than Washington, D.C. is. So I appreciate all the work that law enforcement does that. Again, the border's important. Security is important, but at the same time, we got to make sure that we also rely a lot on trade and tourism. In fact, with Mexico, there's over $863 million of trade every $1 billion every year. That's $1.8 billion every single day. So trying to find that balance between security and trade and tourism is important. Laredo, as you know, we're the largest inland port. I think in February we surpassed LA, which means we're the largest port in the whole country. So we appreciate all the good work, Albert Flores and everybody that does the work down there in the area. Also, I do want to talk about a couple things. Operational control, and I'll be asking a question about that, was defined by the Secure Fence Act in 2006. No administration has been able to achieve it. Not President Bush, that it passed under him, not President Obama, not President Trump, and certainly not President Biden also. So I certainly want to talk to you about the work that what we need to do, not political, but how do we work in a practical way, Democrats and Republicans, to get this work done? So I certainly want to work with my colleagues to address this. Also, the same thing talking about budgets. I do want to emphasize that the last 2 fiscal years, we actually have added over $2.4 billion to the CBP Budget Authority. That's over a 15% increase, more than the prior administration. So I want to emphasize that we've added over $2.4 billion from the prior administration. With that, we've been able to leverage funding, more Border Patrol agents, more CBP officers, intel specialists, trade enforcement staff, and other personnel, along with the technology and ports of entry, and of course, making sure that we have technology between ports of entry also. I know sometimes, some folks believe in a 14th century solution called the wall. But I think we got to look at the 21st century technology. And again, it is important to understand that in South Texas, the border, we believe in private property rights. Private property rights. So if you've been a landowner for generations, you don't want the big bad government to come over and take your property. That certainly takes away the water access to cattle and wildlife and other things that we have. So I appreciate that. And let me just say in conclusion, Commissioner Miller, I know there's a lot of work. There are some funding gaps that we have to look at. And certainly I'm hoping that we can work together to address some of the funding gaps that you all have and address those issues. So with that, I say welcome. And Mr. Chairman, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Cuellar, and thank you. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that I am not Chairman Joyce.
Well, you got the gavel.
He is delayed in another hearing, but he will be here as soon as he can, Commissioner. And with that, Commissioner Miller, without objection, your full written testimony will be entered into the record. And with that in mind, we would ask for you to please summarize your opening statement in 5 minutes. Thank you.
Chairman Rutherford, Ranking Member Cuellar, and members of the subcommittee, I am honored to testify today on behalf of the nearly 65,000 dedicated employees of U.S. Customs and Border Protection who protect our nation day and night from ever-evolving criminal and terrorist threats, and while also enforcing trade compliance and facilitating the safe and efficient flow of lawful travelers and commercial goods across our borders. This year marks the 20th anniversary of the Department of Homeland Security and the creation of CBP. We will not forget how the events of 9/11 changed our nation and led to the creation of the world's first comprehensive border security agency. This year also represents a personal anniversary. I began my federal career nearly 30 years ago with the U.S. Customs Service. Over the course of my career, I've overseen many of CBP's complex responsibilities related to trade, travel, and national security. I know firsthand that CBP has an immensely difficult job, and I am constantly amazed at the perseverance of the men and women of CBP and the commitment to our mission. I am grateful for this subcommittee's recognition of the physical and mental pressures that affect CBP employees and their families. Tragically, CBP lost 11 employees to suicide in 2021 and another 15 in 2022. These distressing figures are further compounded by a record number of line-of-duty deaths. The well-being of all CBP employees remains my top priority, and I am thankful for the critical resources Congress has provided towards our shared commitment to the welfare of the CBP workforce. As you know, CBP considers considerable operational challenges on the southwest border, and the men and women of CBP continue to be up to the task. Specifically, CBP continues to counter the dynamic of threat of sophisticated transnational criminal organizations engaged in human and drug smuggling, including the production and trafficking of illicit fentanyl, an extremely lethal synthetic opioid. We also continue to respond to the historic flow of migration in the Western Hemisphere. The United Nations recently estimated that there are approximately 660,000 migrants currently in Mexico, including over 200,000 Haitian and Venezuelan nationals, in addition to 287,000 internally displaced Mexican nationals. Many of these individuals could attempt to enter the United States in the near term. Taking actions to address another near-term challenge, CBP continues to prepare for the transition from Title 42 to full Title 8 immigration processing in coordination with the Department of Homeland Security and other federal partners. Our preparations align with CBP's overall strategy to prioritize national security, strengthen our border operations, protect the American people, provide for the safe and humane processing of migrants, and administer consequences for unlawful entry, including removal and prosecution. And this approach continues to produce results. In fiscal year 22, Border Patrol agents intercepted more than 12,000 individuals with prior criminal convictions, and CBP officers arrested more than 15,000 individuals wanted for criminal activities at our ports of entry. And nationwide, CBP seized nearly 656,000 pounds of illicit drugs, including 15,000 pounds of fentanyl. Every seizure matters, and I cannot give enough credit to the valuable efforts of our frontline personnel. Just 2 days ago, CBP officers in Otay Mesa seized 776 pounds of fentanyl in one single event. Our partnerships are also invaluable to our enforcement efforts. For example, through Operation Blue Lotus, CBP and our Homeland Security investigation partners are surging our intelligence analysis and enforcement capabilities to not only target and seize illicit fentanyl, but also pursue investigations and take down criminal networks. Since the operation's implementation just 1 month ago, we've made 80 arrests and more than 66 seizures of fentanyl, totaling nearly 3,700 pounds. Through a concurrent operation between the ports of entry, the Border Patrol has seized an additional 825 pounds of fentanyl. We've also enhanced our enforcement operations in the trade environment, including those to combat global forced labor, by applying new authorities Congress provided through the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act. Since its implementation 9 months ago, CBP has intercepted more than 3,500 shipments for forced labor concerns. The President's fiscal year 2024 budget for CBP builds on these accomplishments by supporting continued investments in border security technology and personnel ensuring we continue to expand our situational and domain awareness, respond to emerging threats, detect and intercept dangerous drugs and contraband, and provide efficient processing and safe, humane conditions for migrants while in CBP custody. Additionally, the budget supports our commitment to workforce care, such as expanding on-site clinician availability and enhancing suicide prevention, chaplain, and peer support programs. In closing, I want to thank the members of this subcommittee who have traveled to the border to observe CBP's critical operations and dedicated frontline workforce. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Commissioner, and I'll now recognize myself for Mr. Joyce and ask my questions. As I mentioned in the opening statement, the President's budget significantly underfunds, I believe, the current level of border security capabilities that we have in the field today. So my first question, how do the cuts to border security technology programs like the ATS, the surveillance towers, how does that impact the agency? And if Congress decided to accept the President's budget as is, what kind of consequences would there be for border security operations?
So, Mr. Chairman, thank you for your question. Certainly, I recognize the structural deficiencies in the 2024 budget due to timing and some other administrative concerns. That being said, I would look forward to working with Congress to ensure that those structural deficiencies are corrected.
Absolutely, and we look forward to working with you on that as well. And kind of following up along that same vein of questioning, among the cuts, this budget proposes a $63 million reduction to Border Patrol pay, even while we're trying to bring new officers on. How harmful would that be if Congress doesn't fix the hole that's created by this request?
Yeah, so for the pay, as you know, we continue to work, and I can talk more about this at length, but we continue to work on our hiring to actually bring our staffing up to the appropriated levels that Congress is funding us for. As you know, we haven't been able to hire Border Patrol agents, additional Border Patrol agents above the 1955 since 2011. We were appropriated an additional 300 agents last year, an additional 350 agents this year. So we're making strides and really looking at our hiring pipeline to ensure that we're increasing recruiting, that we're fixing our academy and our attrition rates and a number of other issues. So, you know, we're confident that we have the funds right now going into next year to hire the additional agents.
Do you have a percentage of authorized positions that were filled? That, you know, with your throughput at the academy?
So right now, we're sitting at about 19,000 agents, and again, we're authorized 19,855.
But how many agents are you putting through the academy in a year when those positions are authorized, like the 350?
So we're continuing, I don't have the exact number, I can get back to you on that, but we're continuing to, so if I could, I'll take just a second.
Sure.
So, number one, we looked at our academy, and our attrition rate at the academy was over 30%. So we worked with the chief of the academy to look at why the attrition rate was what it was, and without changing the requirements of the academy. We resequenced some of the testing, got additional mentors for the chief counselor, the legal training. In addition, we took the physical fitness aspect and we used the entire 117 days to get from A to Z instead of right about the 6 month or the halfway mark.
Right.
So that's allowed us to get the attrition rate down to 9%. Now on the front end, we've ramped up our hiring. So we need to really get to about 6,000 applications a month, and we were around 4,000. So for the last 2 months, our applications have really driven, and we're getting close to that level. So that's at the front end, that's on the back end. In between, we're looking at our HRM process through our expertise we've learned with the Office of Field Operations when we had a similar hiring surge. So we're confident, and we thank Congress for the flexibility you gave us in the 23 budget, which allowed us to hire Border Patrol processing coordinators while we fix our hiring pipeline. So that's not a direct answer, but we're working on it.
No, listen, I'm, as a training center director myself for a very large law enforcement agency, what you did was great management, so thank you for that. Last question, I think, for this round. Commissioner, is CBP ready for a migrant surge? You know, we talk about the numbers of people currently waiting in Mexico. When Title 42 goes away, can you talk about the impact that that's going to have, going from 6,000 encounters a day to up to 18,000 maybe? Can you also tell me in the, well, let's just leave it there because I don't think you'll have time to answer the second part of that.
So, if I may, to start with what we're doing to surge resources to the southwest border, obviously May 11th, Title 42 is going away. We do know that there's a large amount of folks on the north of Mexico. Really, in the last 12 months or so, we've hired 1,100 we've brought on 1,100 Border Patrol processing coordinators. We've let a contract to bring in contract processing coordinators, so we brought on 590 processing coordinators. We continue to, or we've doubled our transportation contract. We have the first ever air transport contract in the history of Customs and Border Protection. We've, on top of that, we've increased our capacity across the southwest border to over 6,000 for holding capacity, and we will have an additional 2,500 added to that in the near future. I just took a trip down to Panama and Colombia last week to work with the Panamanians and the Colombians on an agreement to slow down the flow through the Darien. I have a Border Patrol team on site working with the Panamanians this week. So we're doing a whole host of things to prepare for the ending of Title 42. Obviously, we're working with other government partners through the volunteer force, through law enforcement personnel to get those folks to the southwest border. I can tell you our efforts over the last year have allowed us to get a significant amount of badges back to the border, Border Patrol agents in between the ports of entry. And we've actually seen the results of that through the results of our operations against fentanyl.
Thank you, Commissioner. And thanks for the efforts to stop them from getting to our border to begin with. That's where the real answer is at, not processing them faster when they get there. With that, I will yield to the ranking member, Mr. Cuellar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner, again, I want to talk a little bit about operational control measures. As you know, that term was defined in the Secure Fence Act of 2006 as, quote, the prevention of all, and the key is all, unlawful entries into the United States, including entries by terrorists and other unlawful aliens and instruments of terrorism, narcotics, and other contraband. Keep in mind, as I said during my opening statement, that the last 2 fiscal years, more than the prior administration, we've added over $2.4 billion to CBP budget authority. That's over a 15% increase. Now, can you tell me how many of the 1,954 miles that we have with Mexico are under, quote, operational control? And I want you to go by the Bush administration, the Obama administration, the Trump administration, and currently the current administration.
Well, thank you, Ranking Member. You know, I don't believe that we've ever had operational control by that definition.
Under Bush?
Under any, since the definition was
Bush, Obama,
published
Trump,
in 2006.
or even on that.
Right.
So, and again, I know that metric can be hard to achieve, but I think we all want to work with you to try to reach that goal. I think it's a goal that we need to reach, and whatever way we can help you with the right resources, please let us know. Now, I want to follow up on what the chairman said right now. I believe that using football as an example, I hate playing defense on the 1-yard line called the U.S.-Mexico border. A lot of times people want to emphasize everything on the 1-yard line, but I'd rather play defense on their 20-yard line. So I think there's three things that I in my opinion, if y'all implement it correctly, I think it should work to address what's going to happen on May 11th. One, the agreement with Colombia, Panama, and the U.S., if y'all work on that, you should be able to stop a lot of folks from coming in there. It's a 60-day, but hopefully y'all can keep it longer than 60 days. I assume it's a pilot program. Number one, the asylum officers that will be now, is the right word, embedded in CBP, Border Patrol facilities, where they can do the expedited decisions. And as you know, that's important because if you have 100 people asking for asylum, 88 to 90% are going to be rejected. So I don't think we ought to be letting in 100% in. So those asylum officers, if we do it correctly, should work. And then finally, the new rule, which I'm hoping will come out before May 11th, and I know that there are some folks, more progressive folks, might not like it, but I like two parts of it. One, if somebody's asking for asylum, they should not come in between ports of entry, because I got a lot of landowners that don't like that one bit at all. And they should go through the port of entry without disrupting trade and tourism, which are so important to us. And then the other thing is the third party, third country. It's something that I've been advocating for many years, even before the Trump administration. Tried to add that in the appropriations, but I wasn't successful. But that basically means that if somebody has a fear and they pass through another country where they could have asked asylum, then that fear is gone. The U.S. is, we welcome people, but the U.S. is not the only place where you take the fear away. So the rule hopefully will be coming out, but if you can talk about those three things, and again, I believe in law and order at the border, but at the same time respect the rights of the legitimate asylum folks that are asking for asylum, should I say.
Thank you, Ranking Member. So a couple of things. Couldn't agree more on the collaboration with our foreign partners, whether, the regional strategy, whether it's visa policies that are the same throughout the region, whether it's working with our Panamanians and Colombian partners to ensure that they are stopping the transnational criminal organizations from trafficking these vulnerable people through the Darien. So we continue to work with a number of foreign countries, including Panama, Colombia, Mexico, and in South America. As you pointed out, we have made some modifications to our facilities so that we can do enhanced removal, and this is important, enhanced expedited removal from CBP facilities of single adults from easy-to-remove countries. As you know, we're not a long-term detention facility for families and the like. We have deployed 600-plus interview booths and with video audio capability to our facilities, and we are working with CIS and EOIR on the video and audio capabilities. We've been testing out this process in RGV last week and across the southwest border. Last week in RGV and across the southwest border this week, so we continue to work out the kinks. And lastly, and most importantly, I truly believe in what you said, is that we need both a pathway and a consequence.
Yeah. Without consequences, as you know, Mr. Chairman, folks will see the border as a speed bump, and we need to have consequences. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Good point, Mr. Cuellar. And now we'll turn to my good friend, Mr. Newhouse.
Thank you, Acting Chair Rutherford and Acting Commissioner Miller, thank you for being here. Very much appreciate. And just let me say, if you could convey the committee's thanks to all the men and women that you work with to secure our border. Difficult job, and we stand as a partner with you to help accomplish that. So, as has been mentioned over the last couple of years, this committee's provided, and I might say with strong bipartisan support, significant resources for force multiplying border technology that's used between the ports of entry. We have heard directly from Border Patrol sector chiefs as well as agents about the value of autonomous surveillance tower, innovative technology that leverages autonomy to serve as that force multiplier for those agents that are stretched so thinly. In fact, we even had just recently the Secretary, Mr. Mayorkas, testify, and I think I can almost quote him saying, harnessing these innovations, including exploring how we can use AI to be a force multiplier for our brave, heroic personnel. So just, first of all, a question. Could you share with us how the increased deployments of autonomous technology has actually supported agents in the field? What are we getting for our investment there?
Well, first of all, I will relay your thank you to the men and women of CBP, and we do appreciate it. And second of all, the technology that we've deployed along the southwest border has been extremely valuable to the men and women of CBP. When you're talking about autonomous surveillance towers, when you're talking about ISTs, the remote towers, the mobile towers, the UGs, the underground sensors, the cameras with the autonomous technology on them that will identify events. And when you're talking about the autonomous, that means we don't have to have a person evaluating every single image, obviously, every single radar signature and the like. And what we've been able to do through the funding is take that autonomous capability and bring it in, and again, thank you for the funding, to a common operating picture with less people. So in the future, or in the past, we used to have 9 screens looking at 9 different feeds from 9 different towers, and the person trying to figure out which each one of these events were. Now with the autonomous technology, it brings it all together, very few people, one screen, and it gets it to people, agents out in the field on their handheld, and tells them where they have to go and directs them to where they are. So we don't have to have, so number one, our command and control center isn't filled with people and screens. And number two, we're getting that information to our agents real time so they can respond to that threat. So the technology that has been provided to the men and women of CBP has been extremely valuable in allowing us to get out there and look at those events that we need to.
Awesome. Good, thank you. So similar to my colleague, Mr. Cuellar, I live on the northern border. And CBP's figures tell us that in 2021, just over 27,000 aliens were encountered. By 2022, that figure had gone up to, I believe, 109,000. And just through the end of January of this year, the encounters have been 56,000 on the Canadian line. And so I would guess, following that trend, we're going to be over 200,000 by the end of the fiscal year, at a double of where we were last fiscal year. So my understanding in Blaine and the state of Washington, there's only one mobile surveillance capability, which is basically a truck-mounted surveillance system. I know you can't easily move fixed assets, but given the increase that we have seen and that which we're anticipating, wouldn't it make sense to reallocate and acquire more assets to focus on the over 5,000-mile-long border that we have with Canada? And so I didn't see any request for resources to do that in this document. So could you talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, most certainly along the northern border, technology is a force multiplier across the northern border, and we need to continue to look at what assets we have up there and get the appropriate assets up. I'll have to get back to you on exactly what our plan is to get the right technology on the northern border, but 100% with you, we have to get that technology up there as a force multiplier for the men and women.
Yeah, I agree. We're not nearly the numbers that we're seeing in the southern border, but certainly the trend is not good, and we need to get ahead of it. So thank you very much. Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Newhouse, and we'll now turn to the gentlelady, Ms. Underwood.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Miller, as a nurse, one of my focuses on this subcommittee has been healthcare and safety of CBP agents and migrants in your care. Over the last 4 years, I've been able to visit CBP facilities at the U.S.-Mexico border, and I've seen the health operations from intake assessments to the medical supply and teams on site. I was proud to secure funding for CBP to switch to electronic medical records, and I'm very glad to see that your most recent budget overview reports that this has, quote, markedly improved medical documentation, resulting in significant enhancements to patient care and safety, as well as operational efficiency. It's critical that no matter what the migration levels are or whether our immigration system is operating under Title 42 or Title 8, health and safety remains a top priority at CBP. So, Mr. Miller, with the anticipated end of Title 42, what actions has CBP taken and what plans do you have in place to ensure the health and medical needs of both migrants and CBP personnel are fully met?
Well, thank you. Number one, I appreciate your continued support for the medical support of the men and women and the migrants alike. So I'll start with the current situation where we're at with medical support and what we're doing to ensure that we have appropriate medical support. So as you know, we have approximately 1,400 medical professionals along the southwest border today. So we're at the number that we're looking to be at. We're looking at adding additional child caregivers in order to do that. We're looking at a contract modification so that we can up the pay that we're paying the child caregivers, as we found a little bit of a tough time recruiting, but we still have 109 per shift across the southwest border, which, as you know, is a significant improvement. We continue to work with the chief medical officer from the Department of Homeland Security to have those RFAs available should we need additional support, whether it's from HHS, continue to work with our U.S. Coast Guard partners as well. So, I think we're well suited, number one, with the people we have at the border, and number two, with the partnerships we've developed over the last 2 years to ensure that we have the appropriate medical support for the migrants in our custody. On the CBP front, the money that has been allocated to the Customs and Border Protection over the last really 3 years, 2 years, and with the request for $34 million in fiscal year 2024, we've really made huge strides in what we're doing to take care of our workforce. We've got the behavioral clinicians, 30 some on site. We will have 50 on site by the end of this year.
Great.
The psychologists, we're going to have 13 psychologists
Great.
on board across the southwest border this year. We've increased our training for all of our supervisors, called LiveWorks, I believe, which ensures that they know what signs to look like. As my colleague, the Deputy Commissioner, always states, we want to get left to bane. We want to be able to identify those indicators before they get to that point.
Yep.
So we're working also with Veterans Affairs, who's been really a force multiplier along the southwest border. We're working with an NGO that's providing a specific service in El Paso right now. So that's, I think that's going to be hugely beneficial as well. And then really going forward, we continue to have a trust deficit with our employees. We want our employees to use the services that we're putting out there. And what do I mean by that? As we're looking at the voluntary alcohol treatment program. We want individuals to know that they can sign up for that and they can come back and they have a job after they're finished getting well. The same if
Great.
there's a mental health issue. So we're working with the union to update our policies and our procedures to ensure that the men and women are using the services that this committee's been so kind to put forth to us the last 2 years and now 3.
Thank you. Well, as we know in the news, there's a series of budget cuts that have been proposed by Republican leadership, and the plan would revert spending levels to fiscal '22, which means DHS would see a $3.4 billion cut. Can you explain how the funding cuts, the proposed funding cuts to DHS would impact the health and safety of CBP personnel, migrants in U.S. custody, and our entire border management system?
Thank you for the question. Certainly at Customs and Border Protection, we could not sustain that cut for operations or for the health, safety, welfare of the migrants. I think from the American public standpoint, we would not be able to surge resources to the southwest border to attack the fentanyl problem. We would most likely have to cut back on our medical contract. We would have to ensure, or we'd probably have to take down some of the south side facilities where we're providing the wraparound care. Certainly, our Border Patrol processing coordinators, processing coordinators, we'd no longer be able to employ, which means we'd have less agents in between the ports of entry doing their border security work. On the trade side, the trade and travel at our ports of entry would be decimated. We'd have long lines, and cargo containers would be sitting in ports of entry for a longer amount of time. Our Uyghur Forced Labor Act, we would probably not be able to enforce it the way we are enforcing it today. So there's a whole host of issues that would happen if we would go backwards with the budget.
I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Underwood. And now we call on Ms. Hinson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Acting Commissioner, for coming before us today. I appreciate, again, the hard work of the men and women at the CBP. I just want to follow up on something really quick. When did the soft-sided facilities pop up? When did we start enacting those at the border to handle the surge?
It would, I believe, fiscal year 2021. I can't remember the exact date we put the first one up.
Right. So I visited the border in late spring, early summer at Eagle Pass and had a chance to see that. How much is that costing every quarter?
So the soft side facilities right now are about $991 million a year.
A year. So nearly $1 billion a year going to these soft-sided facilities that could be eliminated if we would control the southern surge at our border. And I know CBP is stretched thin. I'd rather see those resources go toward stopping forced labor materials from coming into our country, interdicting those drugs. And this could all be eliminated with a different posture toward immigration at our southern border. And I think that's a goal of mine at this committee is we want you to be able to strengthen CBP's efforts at our southern border. You've been stretched thin. The challenges you're facing surge at a historic level we haven't seen. That's been under this administration since 2021, exponentially worse than we've ever seen. And I'm extremely concerned about the number of known terrorists and criminals who have come across our southern border as a result of the weakness, not as a weakness of CBP, but as a weakness of policy at our southern border. And nearly a year ago, I actually wrote to you and ICE Acting Director Johnson asking for answers about how a suspected member of the terror watch list was able to not only get into our country, but be released by CBP into the Homeland and ICE as well. So I never got an answer from either agency. Very disappointed in that, and I'd ask you to respond to how this disastrous situation could have occurred in the first place, and what are we doing with the funding that we are giving you to make sure that this does not happen again?
So, ma'am, thank you for the question. I'm not aware of the particular instance, but I can tell you, how the process does work.
Right. This was a person who was apprehended in Arizona, released into the interior, and then apprehended again in Florida. But this is a person who was on our terror watch list, so we can't let this happen, right? I mean, this is a vulnerability for the safety and security of our country, is it not?
Well, so I concur that we cannot allow it to happen, but I can tell you how the process works.
Yes, please explain. Yes.
So when an individual, well, number one, We have developed a number of, so I'm not aware of this individual citizenship, but we have established a number of partnerships throughout the Western Hemisphere, whether it's biometric sharing partnerships or sharing of information of folks entering the hemisphere. So we are continually monitoring that information and working with our foreign partners. But when the person crosses the southwest border and is apprehended, we will take the biometrics and we'll run the biometrics.
And I've seen that in person, the intake. How are you communicating then with these other agencies under Department of Homeland Security?
So I used to run the National Targeting Center, which does all the coordination for CBP. So what will happen is the Border Patrol agent will apprehend the individual. And if the person's on the terrorist watch list, they're mandated to call the National Targeting Center, and they will coordinate with the Terrorist Screening Center, the Threat Screening Center, to determine if that person is a possible match or not a match.
So where did this weakness come then, where this person was not caught in that?
Well, so again, I'm not aware of the particular instance, and I'm more than willing to walk through that particular case, but I can tell you if the person is a match, then we would turn that person to ICRO and they would put them into removal proceedings. It could have been an instance where that person was determined not to be a match, and later on additional information came into the system where it was identified to be a match, and we are continually vetting those individuals, so we would identify that and coordinated with ICRO to apprehend that person, pick them up, and put them into removal proceedings at that point. So we do have a layered approach. If somebody is released, we will identify them and we will go apprehend them. And I'm more than happy to look at this particular case and determine exactly what happened. But like
I think that's my goal, is to make sure this
Yep.
does not happen again. And obviously, this I see as just a massive hole in our security, and anything we can do to make sure that we're not releasing these kinds of people into our country. I mean, it makes us all less safe, and that's what keeps me up at night. I've got 10 and 12-year-old boys. The last thing I want in my community is to be less safe and secure. And we know that people are literally going all over the country, so huge concern. And I'm almost out of time, but real quick, wanted to ask a question about the CCP, because we have seen an increased influx in Chinese nationals, obviously coming across our southern border as well. Can you touch on what the CBP is doing to counter kind of that initiative from the CCP in exploiting the weaknesses or vulnerabilities, whatever they are doing to obviously take advantage of that to get more people into our country?
Yes, ma'am. So we work very closely with the Joint Terrorism Task Force and the Counterintelligence Task Force, led by the FBI, number one. Number two, with the Chinese migrants specifically coming across the southwest border. It is the third largest migrant population in the United States. And historically, we have seen a number of, surges up and down with Chinese nationals, both at our ports of entry, in between our ports of entry. And I can tell you with, as you pointed out, the oppressive regime, the religious persecution, and the fact that these folks couldn't travel for the last 3 years because of the COVID lockdown, it's not we expected that we would see more Chinese migrants coming into this hemisphere. So what I can tell you is we will identify how they enter the hemisphere. We will work with Department of Justice, Joint Task Force Alpha, and HSI to identify the networks that are smuggling these individuals into the hemisphere. We'll work with the Colombians and the Panamanians, because we know that they're coming through the Darien, and we'll try to disrupt these transnational criminal organizations. When they do get to our southwest border, we will ensure that we're running them with our partners, LE and IC partners, against the databases, and then we will we'll take the appropriate action based on those results.
Thank you, and I'm out of time. I'll yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Hinson. Next up is Mr. Guest.
Mr. Miller, thank you for being here today. I know we had the opportunity to speak by phone a week or so ago. Just earlier this week, we saw DHS released encounter numbers for the month of March. National encounters, 257,000. That marks the 12th straight month of 200-plus encounters along the border. The 24th straight month of 185,000-plus encounters. We know that fiscal year 21, we set a record with 1.9 million. That record was broken in fiscal year 22 with 2.7, and we're on pace in fiscal year 23 to break that record once again. I think clearly that we're seeing a humanitarian crisis along the southwest border. That's one not caused by CBP. You and your agents are doing the best job that you can to manage a very difficult situation. And I applaud you for your budget request asking for additional agents. I think those agents and more are much needed. And I think the agents that work along the southwest border are underpaid, and that we need to recognize the incredible work that they do each and every day under a very difficult situation. But as we see the border at historic levels. Matter of fact, Chief Ortiz in March testified before the Homeland Security Authorizing Committee that 5 of the 9 sectors along the southwest border, in his opinion, were not secure. And we see the budget that has been presented, and if I'm reading the figures correctly, it appears to me that Customs and Border Patrol, that the President's budget is asking for a 7.5% decrease from the funds that were received last Congress. And so as we talk about all of the issues that we're facing, how should this not be one of the agencies that Congress should invest and invest robustly in? Because we know, and you mentioned it very briefly, Title 42 goes away in less than a month. That we expect a surge along the southwest border. I think you told me, and correct me if I'm wrong, that there are individuals that you have intelligence on, or groups of individuals who are in Mexico waiting for Title 42 to expire before they attempt to enter the country. Is that correct, or did I misconstrue something that you said?
No, sir, that's correct.
And you also spoke very about the Darien Gap and the number of individuals that come across the Darien Gap. CNN did a recent article on that. I don't know if you saw it. I think it came out maybe earlier this week about individuals that were making that trek through the Darien Gap. They said last year, and again, these are CNN numbers, so they're not CBP numbers, but said that roughly 250,000, so 250,000 people came through the Darien Gap last year, that was twice the number the year before, that was 10 times the average of 2010 through 2020, and that so far, year to date, based on their figures, we were 6 times higher in the first few months of the year, first quarter of the year, I guess, than what we saw last year. And so it seems to me that the numbers of encounters along the southwest border they don't seem to be going down. If anything, based on the information I've received, and correct me if I'm wrong, we're expecting that 250,000, which was what we saw last month, with Title 42 going away. Do you expect that number to increase at least through the next several months?
The number of encounters between the port of entry last month on the southwest border was about 163,000. Still, historic numbers.
Yeah, and you're right. So I think it was 191 last year on the southern border, last month in March for the southern border, and the total for the northern and southern was 257. So, just looking at the southern border, this month 191,000. Which was up from 153,000 the month before, but down from the all-time high of 250,000 in December. So the numbers along the southwest border, particularly as we get into the warmer months, because we know traditionally that January and February, the number of encounters along the southern border are generally just because of the temperature, that those numbers are generally down, and they begin increasing in March, continuing through the end of the year. With Title 42 going away, do you see that trend continuing again?
Yes, I do. I do expect the numbers will go up after May 11th.
And you talked a little bit, and you said something about you recognize some sort of structural deficiencies in the budget request. Explain to me what you were meaning when you talk about structural deficiencies within the budget request.
Sir, thank you for the question. And really, mostly the deficiencies I'm seeing is the ONS, the operation, the ONS funds to continue operating some of the technology that we've requested and received the last 2 years. So some of the very same towers, I think it was alluded to. So some of the very same towers we're talking about. So obviously, our goal is to work with this committee to ensure that we sustain what we've already been given before we purchase new.
And last question, and I don't have a clock, Mr. Chairman, so I apologize if I'm over.
You're way over.
Okay, well, at that time, I'll yield back and wait for the second round.
Thank you, Mr. Guest. And Mr. Chern has joined us. We will go to you next, sir.
Sorry we're late, got too many things going on. You're always over, though. He's consistently over. Hey, thanks for joining us, Commissioner Miller, appreciate it. The challenges facing CBP are substantial, complex, require more effective technologies to maximize your resources. Your innovation team has been successful identifying and demonstrating some new promising technologies, but we need to increase our return on the investment by transitioning successful stress-tested technologies into the base budget as soon as possible. So for your experience at the National Targeting Center, you understand the long-term value of leveraging precision targeting capabilities over casting a wider net. So this lets use our resources much more effectively, both on the northbound but also on the southbound flow of guns and cash. So expanding these pre-primary scanning would close the scanning capacity gap and could be a game changer on contraband interdiction. So as of now, those scanned images at the port of entry are sent to an officer in a common center, and CBP is not adequately deploying the A1 in machine learning to maximize interdiction capabilities of the NII systems. Can you discuss your role on the rollout and how you're going to use artificial intelligence and ML technology more effectively?
Thank you, Congressman, for the question, and again, thank you to the committee for the funds that we've received on the Southwest border, in particular to the non-intrusive technology as we deploy it across the Southwest border, so we can screen more vehicles and both passenger vehicles and commercial vehicles at our ports of entry. So, sir, directly to your point, in January, and thank you for your support of our Invent team, by the way. So in January, our Office of Information Technology and our innovation team had a conference with 68 companies to discuss just that, our requirements for artificial intelligence, machine learning, so that we could process these images before primary and get that information to our officers and agents to make an informed decision. We discussed our requirements, our challenges, what we were looking for with those companies. We put out an RFP. That RFP is due back to us at the end of this month, and through some of the procurement vehicles we have. When we get that written response at the end of April, we will be able to act on some of that new emerging technology that's out there, and we will continue to work with this committee for funds to fund additional technology as it becomes available. But thank you for your question.
Now, when you look at the total number of multi-energy and low-energy portals ordered, how many have been paid for fully or partially?
138 have been paid for fully.
Would you describe the agency as being on track with respect to deployment of these systems?
So there, as you know, sir, there have been some delays, a number of different things. As you know, you've been to the Southwest border. Each port is not equal, it's not the same. Some we have challenges with the distance. So remember, we're fundamentally changing the way we do business on the Southwest border, and that we're trying to do the scans prior to primary. Some of these locations don't have the space before primary. Some of these locations have other technology that interferes with the NII, and it doesn't make it useful. So we've done a study across the southwest border. We've procured the equipment. We're working with GSA and the bridge owners on construction. Mexico itself has also purchased additional scanning technology for their side of the border that we will be working with them on. So by 2024, we believe that we're going to at least have started to put all of that technology in the ground. At the same time, to your previous question, developing that artificial machine learning to get it on top of it. Now, I'm with you. I want to do it quicker, and we're going to do it as quick as possible, but this is a once in, my lifetime chance to change the way we're doing business and really getting all that information to our officers and agents real time so they can make the best decision.
73 million cars coming across the border at legal ports of entry, 200,000 a day. We've really got to use technology, or we've got no shot. And I want to just stress, I know my time is running out, but follow my Republicans' lead, stress the importance of the southbound. I mean, the Mexican government is obsessed with the southbound flow of guns going into the cartels, which has made the country so unstable and leading to immigration issues, et cetera. We got to make sure we work on that 30 million that CBP got in 23 and make sure that happens again in 24, and we work on the southbound gun issue. I yield back.
Thank you, sir.
Chair will recognize Mr. Cloud.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Acting Commissioner, for being here. And just want to echo the sentiments that we certainly appreciate what the boots on the ground are doing and what your department's tasked with. I live in South Texas, and so we got the opportunity, of course, to tour as many people have and shake hands and know many of the people who work in the communities and what have you. And it's a yeoman's effort in very difficult circumstances, and so certainly appreciate that. A lot's been said about what operational control is, and I'll read the definition again. It's been read already, but in this section, the term operational control means the prevention of all unlawful entries into the United States, including entries by terrorists and other unlawful aliens, instruments of terrorism, narcotics, and other contraband. And you've said, by that definition, we do not have operational control. Neither has anyone since this definition was meant. It seems to me that the hang-up is on the word all, in the sense like until we get that number to 0, we'll never have, I would just like to ask you, why do you think that word all is there, and what's the purpose of that?
I can guess. I mean, it's certainly an aspirational goal that we'd all like to attend.
It would seem to me like that is meant to make it very clear of what the goal is, as opposed to being some sort of get out of accountability free card when members come before us, in the sense of, we shouldn't be creating exclusions or exceptions or creating redefined parole and all these different kind of things, that we need to do what the law says and not make exceptions to what the law says. I wanted to ask you about the budget. You're advocating for the hiring of 100 more Border Patrol agents? Yes?
I believe it's 350, yes.
Oh, 350? Okay. I'm sorry, Border Patrol, that's Border Patrol agents and processing, and support? Or that's just the agents?
I believe it's 350 agents, 300 Border Patrol processing coordinators, and 150 OFO officers.
Okay.
And I've got a lot of numbers in my head, so.
Okay, 350 agents, 350 border processing?
350 agents, 300 Border Patrol processing coordinators, and 150 CBP officers for our ports of entry, I believe.
That's great. There's been a good amount of attrition lately. Could you speak to what you're seeing and why?
So there's a number of issues that affect attrition, frankly. With our Office of Field Operations, the folks at the ports of entry, they got a law enforcement status in 2012 2008, which means in 2028, we're going to have a large retirement surge, and Congress tasked us with a study to do what we needed to do. The southwest border, very much the same. We've had hiring surges in the last 20 years, so a lot of these folks are now available for retirement when we're talking about Border Patrol agents. So certainly that's part of the attrition rates.
I know a number of people I talked to, a number of agents I talked to were very concerned that at the same time the administration was talking about getting rid of Title 42, it was placing a new COVID testing regime on the agents, using, ironically, tests that were imported from China that had agents on the testing. Basically, they had to put a carcinogen in their nose to test it. I asked about this before. The director at the time didn't know that was even happening. Is that testing regime still in place?
No.
Okay, thank you. I'm happy to know that. Have the agents that were falsely accused of being whipped been apologized to?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay. Have they been reinstated to their former role?
So the process is still ongoing.
It's still ongoing, and how long has it been?
Let's see, about 18 months or so, is that right?
Do you think actions like being falsely accused of doing something that you're not doing when you're doing your stated mission leads to low morale?
So the investigation's ongoing, and most certainly, we are concerned about the morale of the Customs and Border Patrol folks.
Okay. My time's up. I just saw that. Finally figured out where the clock was, and so I'll save the rest of my...
It's not as fancy down here as it is upstairs where you have a clock.
Maybe buzzers and bells would help.
No worries. Dr. Harris?
Thank you very much. I'm just going to ask one question. I'll yield the balance of my time. Global entry, CBP is in charge of global entry. Is that right? Global entry program?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So I've got a lot of complaints in my office, my district office, that it takes literally years to book a appointment for global entry. Is that true, to book an interview?
No, that is not true.
So is there, and I'll follow up now that you say it, I'll follow up with my person in the district, but what's the maximum acceptable time in your mind that you should have to wait for an interview?
So if I may, we've established a number of additional venues to be able to complete your interview, and one of, I think the best ways to do it is enrollment on arrival, so you can actually complete your interview when you arrive from international travel.
Right, but if you're planning to do it, I mean, again, I live in a rural area. I mean, my people don't take a lot of international flights, but what is the maximum time you think someone should wait to have to wait for an interview?
Well, again, I'm not trying to be difficult, but if you're not traveling internationally, global entry.
Well, they're traveling internationally, but they have to go to Dulles or BWI from the Eastern Shore of Maryland. There's a little bridge over there. Sometimes had a lot of traffic. So it's when they call to set up their appointment for an interview in the future, not on arrival. What's the allowable amount of time that you think they should be having to wait for that interview?
So right now it's approximately 6 months. We would like to get that process down to maybe 30 to 60 days.
Okay, so you think it shouldn't be more than 6 months? Okay, thank you very much. I yield the balance of my time to Mr. Guest, because I know he's got a lot of questions, but they're good questions.
Thank you. Walk me through this and tell me if my figures are correct. I showed that the CBP FY24 request to be $16.87 billion. Is that number accurate?
Yes, sir.
And this would be a $1.37 billion decrease from FY '23 levels?
No,
Because I have FY '23 being 18.374 billion.
so I think what you're referencing is, that also includes the border management fund that we received last year. This year, that's covered by the contingency fund.
Okay, and so the contingency fund is money that's really not going to hire agents, invest in technology, build walls. I mean, that money's going to transport migrants, medical care, alternatives to detention, processing, kind of what we've seen over the last 2 years, where we're investing money not really in anything of any substantial nature, but really just investing money to process people through the system quicker. Is that correct?
So the contingency funding will cover things like Border Patrol processing coordinators, as we talked about, doubling our transport, the medical support, the soft side facilities, and the capacity to hold individuals as we're doing enhanced expedited removal. We have also put in some of the booths that we talked about, so there's a number of different things that we will continue to do with those funds.
Is any of that money going from the contingency fund? And this is separate. I know you're talking about trying to hire 350 new agents and 300 plus new processors, but from the contingency fund, none of the money from the contingency fund is going to hire new agents, correct?
Correct.
And none of the money is going into technology as far as ports of entry, screening processes, as far as things of that nature.
Correct.
All right, and so overall, is it your testimony that you're asking for an increase from last year's budget or a decrease? Because again, the numbers I'm getting were the numbers that I relayed to you, which were a budget decrease. But the total numbers, are you saying is an increase from last budget year?
The total number is almost exactly the same.
Okay, so you're asking for basically level funding.
Yes, sir.
Okay, and based on what you're asking for, on the historic nature of what we've seen and the fact that we expect another surge to be coming when Title 42 ends, are you saying that money is adequate for Customs and Border Patrol to do the job that they're tasked with doing?
Well, sir, to start, I mean, I think I relayed that we do have some structural shortfalls that we're going to have to fix in our budget to ensure that we sustain the technology that we received in the last several years. And secondly, given the flow of migrants across the southwest border, we're certainly going to hit the triggers for the contingency fund.
I'll yield back.
I apologize for being late, Acting Commissioner Miller, but I'd like to ask you, do you believe that physical barriers are an important border security tool?
Yes, sir. I believe personnel, technology, and infrastructure is very important for CBP.
The President abruptly canceled contracts to build physical barriers, and while the Secretary has authorized closing some gates and gaps, no substantial amount of physical barriers have been built since January of 2021. Does the agency need additional physical barriers to help secure the border and buy time for agents to apprehend migrants across the border illegally?
Yeah, sir, I believe, as I stated, we need additional infrastructure, technology, and personnel to ensure that our agents have the tools that they need to respond.
Okay, well, last Congress, my bill, the Prevent Act, was signed into law to require CBP to provide the frontline personnel with containment devices to prevent secondary exposure to illicit narcotics in the line of duty, including fentanyl and other potentially dangerous substances. Has CBP moved to procure or provide these containment devices? Where is the CBP in the process of ensuring our officers and agents on the front lines of the opioid epidemic have access to these containment devices?
Sir, first of all, thank you for the act. I am aware of the act. And secondly, obviously, the physical well-being of our agents and officers hugely important to us. So obviously, you know that we've given them PPAE, we've given them the appropriate training, we've given them the NOx loan, and, you know, provided them with containment training and the like, and we're working very closely, you may or may not know, but with our Office of Science and Technology to look at the containment technology, and we will procure it in conjunction with S&T if it determined to be viable technology.
Sir, it exists, and it's not having to look at it, it exists. And if one of these, if powder form had exploded in one of your offices, it would kill everybody in your office.
No, again, sir, I mean, we're working very closely with S&T and our LT, as you know, we have our forward operating labs to ensure that we're containing appropriately, and we look for additional technology that becomes available to ensure our officers and agents are safe.
Thank you, Mr. Square.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Border wall, 14th century solution. If you look at the 11, 12 million undocumented aliens, or whatever the number is in the U.S., the last figure I saw, and I was just double checking this again, maybe you have better figures, 2/3 of them were visa overstays. And at that time, the number one violator was Canada. Now, I don't know if my friends are talking about putting a fence the northern border, which I hope they're not. And so I just want to make sure that we secure the border and believing in 21st century technology, AI, other things that are important. I think it's the way to look at. And also I'd like to remind my friends that in the last 2 years from the prior administration, $2.4 billion have been added to the CBP budget authority. That's a 15% increase of dollars. So we want to find a way working together to secure the border, including the northern border. And I remind that 9/11 terrorists didn't come through the southern border, but they actually came through the northern border. One of the things that I also want to look at also is the fact on the soft-sided facilities. You know, let's keep in mind that Border Patrol facilities were set up to handle smaller amounts, mainly male adults in the old days that were coming from Mexico to come and do a little bit of work, and then they would go back. So the border facilities, Border Patrol facilities were not set up to handle a lot of folks. So the soft site, which I think the first one, I think it was year 2019, President Trump was the president. The Senate, I think at that time, was Senate controlled by Republicans, and of course, the House by Democrats. So it was set up to handle, because Border Patrol facilities don't have that. Now, having something different, and again, I don't want to, if you've heard me say, I don't want to have the border just be a processing center. I want to make sure that we keep whoever's supposed to stay here and go back. Usually the numbers are 88 to 90% of the people that ask for asylum are going to be rejected. And by the way, looking at some of the latest numbers, China was the one that was getting the biggest asylum granted. 16.2, then Venezuela was 14.5, and then you have other folks. By the way, who are the largest folks who have been, the number sector of folks who have been staying here lately? It's India and China, right? Isn't it?
Excuse me, repeat the
Yeah,
question.
yeah. Where's China and India in number of folks that have been coming into the U.S. or staying here in the U.S.?
Oh, I think the migrant population, India's number 2 and China's number 3.
Number 3. And number 1 are?
Mexicans.
Mexicans, right. Okay. Now, one of the things that I want to look at is, and by the way, I want to thank, you remember David Higgerson? He was the one that gave me the idea about border processing centers. We need to use agents to do their job, but there are certain jobs that I think the support staff or border processing or whatever you want to call them are important. So, you know, we want to get agents, but we also want to get the support staff, and that includes ICE also, to make sure. Now, one of the things that concerns me is, and I agree with my friends, the attrition. We've been losing folks. You know, Border Patrol, sometimes at one time, we were losing more folks than we were actually hiring. So anything you can do to speed up the hiring processing, I would appreciate that. But one of your former Border Patrol chiefs gave me some numbers that are alarming. He said that besides the regular attrition, the mandatory retirements coming up, for FY24, 800 Border Patrol folks that would be hit by mandatory retirements, FY25, 1,500, and then FY26, 2,200 mandatory retirements. Now that worries me because besides regular attrition and the time it takes, we got to do a better job. So let us know what we can do to help you in that aspect.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. I mean, I think, a lot of the things that, the flexibility that this committee has given us to spend our money, certainly on retention bonuses, hiring bonuses, what we're doing is we already discussed, shorten the time frame, but, we have to continue to look at that and continue and also look at potentially some waivers for folks as they hit those caps. So there's a number of different things we have to do to ensure that we continue to not only fix the hiring process, but keep the folks that we have to the point of your colleagues.
And Mr. Chairman, I know this was said where you're at, but Mr. Miller is a career individual, and 30 years right this year. And I know sometimes there's political appointees by Democrats and Republicans, but we really should look a lot to these career folks that know the trends and have seen it before. Something new might be something that's been tried, so I really appreciate the career folks like Mr. Miller. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I think we all agree, Mr. Cuellar. Sheriff Rutherford.
Thank you, sir. Commissioner, I presume that CBP has either general orders or SOPs or training manuals for how to vet individuals that they run across. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I would like the request through the chair, if we could. I'd like to see those documents, the training that they get, the processes that they're supposed to go through. And I'm going to tell you why. And it goes back to the questioning that Ms. Henson had earlier as well. And I keep bringing this case up. My question is, so we have an individual who crosses the border, no ID. We go to vet them. They're not in the biometric system. They have no documents. We have no way of knowing who they are. What is the default policy of CBP with an individual like that?
So there'd be a number of questions I'd have to ask. Number one, certainly, just like you said, we would do the biometric, biographic checks, and certainly if it's a minor or
They go to HHS,
They go to
and they go
HHS.
through the same vetting
Right.
process. Here's my question, because the individual that Ms. Henson spoke of was later determined somehow through vetting to be on the terrorist watch list. Mr. Ulloa, who went to Jacksonville, Florida, and killed one of my citizens, one of my constituents, he actually came across and used a fake name and fake ID, not a fake ID, just a fake name and fake date of birth that made him a juvenile. CBP couldn't tell who he was, so but since he used a date of birth that made him a juvenile, they turned him over to HHS. HHS couldn't tell who he was, so they sent him to Jacksonville, because he's got a relative there, allegedly, who turns out not to be a relative, because they didn't vet him either. He murders my constituent. Then we find out who he is. How did we not? So here's my question. If he can go into the Duval County Jail and eventually we can identify who he is, how did we not identify who he was before we shipped him to Jacksonville? So my question is the default policy of CBP, if you can't tell who they are, let them in? Because that's what it appears to be.
No, sir, that is not the default policy. Again, I've spent my career trying to increase information sharing, vet individuals against all available databases, whether they're IC-held databases, LE-held databases.
I know, and we're doing all we can in that regard. But when you can't tell who they are, what do we do with them?
So in the case of a minor, we're mandated by the TV.
You don't know that he's a minor.
Well, they claim to be, so I'm just telling you, we have to follow the law too, which is a TVPRA, and we have to turn the minor over to Health and Human Services. And as discussed at length,
But there's my question, how do you know he's a minor?
we have to use all available information that we have, and we have to make that determination.
So we take whatever they tell us, and we're making decisions about the security of this country based on what somebody that just illegally crossed the border is telling us. I have serious problems with the way we are vetting people. And the fact that we can't tell who they are at the border, yet when he gets arrested in Duval County, we find out who he is. He's doing 60 years now. Why couldn't we determine that before they sent him to Jacksonville? Why couldn't we determine that? What changed? How did they determine who he was later?
Again, sir, first of all, my condolences to the family and your community.
Look, I understand completely, and I'm not blaming you. I'm just saying it looks like the default policy is to let them in. Why wouldn't we say, no, I can't prove who you are, so you're not coming in? Why wouldn't should that not be our policy, or is that our policy?
Well, again, when somebody comes in, we're going to use all the available information that we have through the biometrics, through the facial comparison.
You can't tell who they are because they're not in any system. What do we do with them?
And so we're going to
We're
coordinate.
letting them in.
Well, we're going to coordinate as
Aren't we?
appropriate.
We're letting them in. We need to look at that policy because we're letting killers into this country. That's got to stop. I yield back.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Simpson?
And thank you, Sheriff, for bringing that up, because that is a true concern in my district. Commissioner, let's see if it stays on. Can you hear me? Okay. This is the finicky one from earlier. So, I want to echo my colleagues' concerns about the attrition at CBP, and you talk about the 25 suicides in the last 2 years, and that is truly heartbreaking that people are facing these challenges and they feel like there's no other way out. And we want to do everything we can to make sure your workforce feels supported. But can you talk a little bit more about the morale? And I think that it's very clear something's got to change with policy, because people feel like they have no other option but to either quit or take their own life, and we don't want to put people in that position. Can you talk about what policies should change at DHS to make sure that we don't face these major problems with our CBP agents?
Well, first of all, thank you, for the support for the men and women of Customs and Border Protection. It's much appreciated. Second of all, thank you for the funding we've received the last couple of years. Number one, we have to take care of our folks. But number two, I think one of the things that we have done over the last 6 months, specifically for the Border Patrol agents, is really making, the last year or so is really making a concerted effort to get the men and women of CBP, or Border Patrol in particular, back in between the ports of entry.
Back to actually fulfilling their mission, not processing people, but out in the field.
Back to in between the ports of entry, and we've made significant strides with the Border Patrol processing coordinators that we've got over 1,000. We have additional classes, and in fact, those folks are becoming our biggest recruiting pipeline. The folks that want to do that same job that the Border Patrol agents.
And then
are.
you might feed them into those positions. In future,
Exactly.
which
So yeah,
we're happy to hear that, obviously, but I mean, you still have a pretty good delta to get to your full force. So can you speak a little bit, obviously you're asking for these new agents, and I asked Acting Director Johnson the same question with ICE, right? You've got this need, and you've got a gap here, over 800 open slots that you currently have, and you're asking for more. Can you tell me more about how you're going to get those people into these slots so we can actually keep our border under control?
Yeah, so thank you, ma'am. So again, I think the flexibility's helped us. Certainly getting the hiring engine back up and running was extremely important. So our application numbers are going up. So we're getting more people into the pipeline. The Border Patrol processing coordinators are actually one of our top recruits. We've looked at the back end, and we spoke at this at length, and Sheriff Rutherford actually mentioned as well at the academy, and fixing our attrition rate, or our
Changing the testing.
Yeah, chasing the testing. So in between, we're looking at our HRM processes to try to, really, for me, it's yield rate. The number of folks coming into the pipeline, making it to Border Patrol agent, and the time to hire. So we have to fix those two things. It's about 260 days right now from the time somebody applies for the job to the time that they get hired. So we need to shrink that, and my challenge to the team is in half, and we're doing that by looking at the processes and procedures of our HRM staff.
Right. Well, because I think when I was down there, I've been down there twice to hear directly from folks, and it was shocking to me to see how many people were being pulled from other areas of DHS, including FEMA, to help with these positions, and that's just unacceptable. These should be CBP agents, not FEMA agents. FEMA should be dealing with hurricanes in Florida and flooding in Iowa, not our southern border. So another thing that the agents pointed out to me is that technology is helpful. And I have been a big supporter of automated surveillance technologies, tactical kits, mobile surveillance capabilities. All of those are force multipliers, and I believe that cross-border tunnel detections, I've learned a lot about that technology and how effective that is, especially when we're talking about stopping fentanyl in these transnational gangs and cartels. Can you talk about the number of encounters that CBP is experiencing at the border, the growing number of people that the cartels are bringing across to distract you from doing your mission, right? And I think it's very clear they're doing that. How valuable are those technologies to your Border Patrol agents?
The technology is, we need the technology. We have to have the technology now. It really, especially with the new automation, machine learning, artificial intelligence, that shrinks the number of folks that we need in these command centers to actually look at the screens and try to determine what's happening. And to your point, with the TAC devices and getting that information directly to our officers and agents so they can respond to those events, it's vitally important. We need the technology, we need the continued funding, and I think our Office of Information Technology and Border Patrol is doing a good job to really get that actionable information to the hands of the frontline agents so they can respond appropriately.
Yeah, and I know I'm out of time, but I'll submit some follow-up questions for the record, specifically about countering things like new threats like xylazine that we're seeing as an amplifier for our fentanyl problems that are already a huge challenge. So thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Appreciate it. I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Henson. Mr. Cloud. No, excuse me, Mr. Guest.
Commissioner, again, I don't want anything that I say to make you believe that we don't fully support Border Patrol. I support personally, as a new member on this committee, I can tell you that I will fight as hard as I can as a member of this committee to make sure that we are hiring new agents, a number in addition to the ones that you've requested, that we are getting agents pay increases, that we are investing in technology, that we're investing in what we need to vet the individuals coming into the country. My frustration, and I believe the frustration of many people on this committee, is the amount of tax dollars that we are having to spend every year on processing. The $4.7 billion contingency fund that has been requested, that is roughly 28% of the entire budget of CBP. And so 1 out of every $4 would then be going to doing nothing but processing. And so we are incredibly frustrated. And I don't want you to feel when you leave here that we are intentionally taking our frustration out on you. We know you don't make those decisions, that those decisions are made. You are a career law enforcement officer, and we want to thank you for that. Now, one of the things that the chairman mentioned that I wanted to talk about as well is physical barriers, wall construction. And we know it's not feasible to build a wall from sea to shining sea, that we're not going to build a wall from RGV to San Diego. But under Secretary Mayorkas, we have had 0 wall construction. If I'm not mistaken, there is $7 million in this budget for wall construction. Is that correct? Or how much is in it? Maybe I should just ask you. It's my understanding that it was 7. But how much money is in the budget request for this fiscal year for wall construction?
I would have to look. I didn't know that there was money in this budget for wall construction.
Are physical barriers an important component to securing the border?
I'll say time and time again, we need infrastructure, we need personnel, we need technology.
All right, but there's no money in this budget for wall construction.
I don't believe so.
All right. And so do you agree or disagree with that? Do you think it should be in there? Do you think we should put money in there? If we're going to be writing the budget, should we write money in the budget for wall construction?
I would have to work with, the Border Patrol and their requirements and get back to you in technical assistance and exactly what we need in our budget.
All right. Chief Ortiz, do you know Chief Ortiz?
Of course.
All right. Chief Ortiz testified.
20-plus years.
Chief Ortiz testified before Congress just last month. He testified that 5 of the 9 sectors along the southwest border were not secure. Do you agree with the assessment of Chief Ortiz?
Well, thank you for the question. Certainly, and I think we discussed this a little bit the other day. In my 29, almost 30 years of experience, I've seen, it's an evolving situation. It's an evolving situation every single day. Today, we might have a situation in El Paso where we need to surge additional resources because of a surge that we're experiencing. Like I'm doing in the Southwest, I may surge resources so I can attack the fentanyl that's coming across the Southwest border, which that surge is certainly having. So I guess my answer is, I defer to Chief Ortiz on his expertise. He runs the Border Patrol. It could be 3 sectors today. It could be 5 sectors tomorrow. And it's been that way ever since we've had a border.
And final question, Title 42 ends May 11th. I know we've talked just very briefly about it. The most recent figures that you've seen as far as expected number of immigrants, we saw some figures that came out in December. It seemed to me that they were somewhere in the 15,000, potentially up to 15,000 a day range, and I could be wrong, and I apologize. I don't have those figures in front of me. But do you have any recent information as to what we can expect when Title 42 ends?
So we're certainly going to see a surge higher than the numbers, and I'm doing my best to answer the questions directly. We're going to certainly see numbers higher than we're seeing today. We're going to see a surge of migrants. We're also going to immediately when Title 42, and as you know, there's certain court rulings that really are hindering what we can and can't do at the particular moment. So when Title 42 goes down, we will immediately start doing enhanced expedited removal across the southwest border, but it's going to take some time for that consequence to take effect, in my opinion. So we're certainly going to see a surge. What that exact number, I don't know what that exact number is. I'm preparing for, certainly 10,000 or so a day, but again, we will continue to surge resources and look at the intelligence every single day. Each sector, individual sector, every single day, work with the Chief of the Border Patrol, Chief Ortiz, the Office of Field Operations to ensure that we're getting the resources down there to respond to the best of our ability.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Guest. Mr. Cloud's recognized.
Thank you, and I do want to echo what Mr. Guest said about we have nothing but appreciation for the members of CBP and appreciation for the understanding, and we need to get you the resources that you need to do your job, and you're in a very difficult situation. A lot of the issues we have is with the policy that you're being asked to implement, and certainly recognize that. I wanted to ask you about visa overstays. By my understanding, there was in 2020 about 684,499 visa overstays. Does that sound about right?
I'm sorry, sir, I'd have to get back to you on the particular numbers.
Okay. Do you know how many gotaways there were last year?
I just looked at the numbers this morning, I can tell you, if you give me 2 seconds. I just looked at the numbers this morning, but I don't want to not give you the right number.
I think it's also 600,000.
Yes.
Is that
Yeah,
correct?
That's correct.
Is that the
I
number
just
you have? Okay.
want to make sure I had them in front of me.
And that's what we actually call known gotaways, right?
It is.
So do you know how many unknown gotaways we've had?
No.
No, because it's unknown, right? So, and those are not coming through the port of entry by and large. Is that correct? They're not running the port of entry. The gotaways are coming in between port.
Yeah, the gotaways are coming in between the ports of entry.
And so the infrastructure would be very helpful in stopping gotaways. Infrastructure, everything you're saying, infrastructure, manpower, technology.
And let's not forget access. Access is one of the, and I haven't said it
Roads.
today. Yeah, we
Yes,
need roads,
yeah.
access to make sure our agents could get to respond to that technology alert that you're talking about.
Exactly. And removal of the Carrizo cane and everything else, right?
Yes.
I wanted to also talk to you about the apprehensions, because if we're looking at last year, encounters were 2,300,000 plus. If we go back to 2020, or if we go back to 2020, COVID was certainly down 450,000. But even going back a year before that, we're talking a million, so half of where we're at right now. Going back to the definition of operational control, I mean, the idea is to be moving toward it, not away from it. It would seem that we're moving away from it. Now, you gave a pretty bleak picture when someone on the committee mentioned the fact that we're looking at going back to discretionary spending levels back to pre-COVID. So pre-COVID traffic would have us at about half of what we have right now with the budget that they had then. And I'm not suggesting that we need to cut the budget for it. I'm for raises for our men and women, but like's been said, I'm not for paying for processing. And so you gave a pretty bleak picture, almost a Chicken Little list of all the things that could not happen, yet I'm looking at this saying, well, at the pre-COVID budget, they were able to have a more secure border. So there seems to be a disconnect there. Could you address that, to me anyway?
Certainly, sir. As we know, agents, let's start with the budget. 75% of our budget is salary, and salaries continue to go up. Obviously, inflation continues to go up. Construction costs continue to go up. And I'm not only talking when, the Chicken Little scenario. In between the ports of entry, it's also at the ports of entry as well. So, certainly our CBP officers, the technology that they're using, the technology we're talking at the southwest border, really the civil works projects that we're trying to do along the southwest border, all those costs are going up. So if we were to go back to our budget 2 years ago, most certainly that would affect us across our organization, but to your point, most certainly at the southwest border.
But we are seeing a lot of the funding go to not protection, but go to processing. Is that correct?
It is correct, but if I may, on the processing, we've made significant advancements in automating our A-file, significant advancements on being able to process people in between the ports of entry through the facial recognition, biometrics. We're testing out where you can actually take a picture of the prints and enroll the individuals, again, making us safe and secure and run against that information, things that we've been talking about. So there's a number of different things we're talking about when we're talking about processing, sir.
Okay, but it still seems like that we could find some efficiency. It's the ROI, if that makes sense, that we're looking for. We're looking for protection, which is actually the P, not processing, CBP, Customs and Border Protection, not Customs and Border Processing. So we're looking for dollars for protection. And the concern here is that we're seeing the border get less secure, and we're spending more money doing it. And some of that I know is no bid contracting. The grant processing is very opaque. I'd like to see that, and I know we're talking more agency secretary level on some of this stuff, but we'll be working on that. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for being here today, and again, appreciate your work.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Cloud. Acting Commissioner Miller, all good things must come to an end, and I know you've been having a great time.
Keep going.
Appreciate your tour of duty in the agency and your hard work. There has been some questions asked that you're going to give answers to, or some other things you're going to get back to us. We'd ask that you do that within 15 business days from today. That gives you roughly 3 weeks or so to get those things accomplished. Any other questions or concerns? With
And
that,
those general orders, SOPs, and training documents.
all the documents you requested. Okay, this meeting is now adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.